Dale did a great job of giving us the basics of power and how it gets from the grid to the end use customer. I'm up here to kind of explain and give comfort to you and your customers that, there are folks that are thinking about the Valley and ERCOT and expanding the grid. And I'm just going to step through the multiple projects that are actually ongoing right now, in the planning phase, or ERCOT's thinking about them long term in the 20 plus year range. And so just introduced Sharyland and HUS. So I work for Hunt Utility Services, and so we're located in Dallas, but we did develop a utility down here, and Hunt family had a kind of a Sharyland plantation. They developed that housing development down there and needed to be able to serve the customers, and to do that most efficiently in the fastest time frame, they were able to essentially create a utility called Sharyland Utility to do that serving. And so I work for HUS, and we do all of our work for the utility itself. And so, and actually the development was actually right here in Mission, Texas. We can go down there and if we have one of these friends of CoSTEP, quick tours and whatnot, I'm hoping that we can, highlight our HVDC tie. It's the largest DC tie between the U.S. and Mexico at 300 megawatts, and it's right here in Mission, Texas. So definitely something that is very interesting to see from an electrical standpoint. But I want to kind of first start off with, what's coming today and in the next couple of years. You can see here, this is a joint project starting all the way south of San Antonio at the San Miguel station. This was what we call second circuit and close the loop. And the second circuit was an additional circuit on a double circuit capable tower starting in San Antonio region, going all the way down to Laredo, and then along the border all the way down to the Port of Brownsville. And so that was a joint effort between STEC, ETT, AEP, and Sharyland. They all had parts of the project where we had to add the wire to the second side of the circuit. That was energized last year, I believe, early last year. And then currently we are building the close the loop portion of it, which took a little bit longer because we had to actually go through a CCM with the commission. But that is putting a new station called Kingfisher in San Benito, and then a new transmission line. It's about 7 miles long between Kingfisher and La Palma. That will be a joint project between AEP and Sharyland, and that one is expected to energize sometime next year. At the same time that this project was being proposed to be a quick fix and support for the Valley, AEP was championing a larger project, and this is essentially a very similar type route, starting south of San Antonio and going down to a couple new stations about, I guess that would be south of Corpus and kind of south of the Laredo area, and then bringing new high capacity 345 kV down to the Valley, an additional 2 or 3 circuits, I believe. Yeah. And so this is, and Dale showed a picture of the Bull transmission line. This is a very unique transmission tower design, and that is actually coming in 2027. And that'll be a big boost to this region and will provide thousands of megawatts of additional capacity for end users to use. Now, Dale mentioned we're dealing with a lot of large load customers as well. I think, Dale, you said you have 15 gigawatts or so. We have about 3,000 Sharyland is doing. Our footprint is significantly smaller than AEP's, and we are transmission only. So we can only interact with the larger loads and the generators. And so we have about 3 of these projects, potentially 4 that we're looking at, and they're all within the gigawatt range. And so these projects that AEP, STEC, and ETT are currently building, the capacity for those will be eaten up, in my opinion, fairly quickly after they energize here in 2027.
Fantastic.
And so what's next then? You're saying, all right, we have these large projects that are coming, and you said they're going to take up a lot of the capacity. What else is coming that will support the region? And there are areas out here that we can talk about. First one, if you've been on the Port of Brownsville, Rio Grande LNG is a significant activity in that region. I actually drove down there yesterday. Flew in yesterday about lunchtime and made my way over to the Port of Brownsville to look at this activity. The last time I saw it was, I think, a year and a half ago, and they were just starting to move equipment onto the site. The site itself is 2 miles long, and there were, 40, 50 cranes up in the air at the same time, actively building this facility. And so AEP has been working with this end-use customer they had to go through and actually get a project approved through ERCOT, and that's the regional planning group process. And Sharyland was a participant of that because a lot of the facilities in this area are Sharyland facilities, and AEP is building some new infrastructure down here. So this will be another joint AEP Sharyland project. And so this is adding a new station called Chalabay, and then connecting to the Palmito and the Kingfisher station, which I just mentioned, and essentially creating a 345 kV loop that will be serving the Port of Brownsville. And this is redundancy, and is what in ERCOT's eyes they're looking at. I have 2 circuits down there, but that's not enough to serve a 650 megawatt load. So they made a 345 kV loop, and now there will be 4 circuits that will be in this general area with the ability to serve the 650 megawatts plus additional capacity down at the Port of Brownsville. And so this project had just got approved in December of last year and is ongoing. There are CCN and routing studies that are currently ongoing. AEP and Sharyland are both working on those. And then Sharyland should be breaking ground on some of our infrastructure in that area here shortly. And the in-service date for that one is 2029. And then lastly, so this will take us out to about the 2030 timeframe. And then with the knowledge that Dale and I have said, we got a lot of large loads coming that will eat up the capacity. What's the future for the Valley? And Dale mentioned it briefly. And the future for the Valley, and essentially the future for the ERCOT system, is this new backbone overlay called 765 kV. And as Dale mentioned, this went through the commission. And one of the reasons, we talked about joining the national grid, and I think Dale hit the nail on the head saying, we don't have to deal with the FERC regulation. If we wanted to do a new voltage class and a new transmission class in ERCOT, and we had to go through federal requirements for that would be a 10 to 15 year approval process alone. And so having ERCOT wholly within the state of Texas and the ability for the Public Utility Commission to act within, I think they've only been talking about this for a year. So they were able to talk about it, study it, and then act on it and order it within a year time frame is a significantly different environment than having to go to Washington, D.C. to convince FERC that this is something that the state of Texas needs and is the best interest for the U.S. That's a more significant effort just to get the project off the ground. And so, as Dale mentioned, they're already doing the CCNs. They've already done the CCNs. They're already doing the engineering for it. AEP has built 765 kV in other markets. And so this is something that is going to move quickly. And so you can see the first lines that were approved are, I'm going to take this apart by noise real quick. We go over to the map here. The first lines that were approved are these red lines here. And that's what the commission is calling the Permian. And that was essentially approved to serve the Permian Basin load. There's a lot of large oil and gas loads out there, as well as data centers that are eating up some of the infrastructure that was built for CREZ and the renewable generation capacity out there. And so those are the first 3 lines that were approved, and those are going forward. Phase 1 would connect those red lines with the purple lines you see here, and that would essentially create a very strong backbone east to west from Dallas to about, Fawn Hills, Corpus. So Dallas for the Corpus area all the way out to West Texas would be a very strong backend. Phase 2 is where the Valley and the Panhandle come into play. And those are the Panhandle would be mainly to collect the wind generation that's up there and bring it closer to the Dallas-Fort Worth area and the 765 kV. Whereas the Valley one would be more to serve load down here, as well as relieve some of the congestion that we're seeing from the generation down in this area. And so those are phase 2. Now, like I said, Permian has already been approved, and that's trucking forward. There will be gating items for the rest of the build-out, so the phase 1 and the phase 2 build-out, and those would be determined by need. And I believe I heard Dell also say earlier that AEP may be close to trying to prove up some of that need, so showing that, hey, AEP has 15 of these large loads, and Sharyland has 3 of them. I'm sure STEC is working on some and potentially beef up as well. There's interest in the Valley, and we believe that phase 2 should probably head sooner rather than later. And so Sharyland would be 100% on board with, helping AEP get that across the finish line, because over the last 6 months, we've seen our queue of studies expand significantly for these large buttons. And so this would be a 2030 to 2040 timeframe. And to kind of give you the scale of what is 765, I know there's a lot of numbers and it's twice as much as 345. So you think, well, maybe it's twice as much capacity. But actually, each one of these lines that are on this map is the equivalent of 3 double circuit 345 kV lines. So the largest backbone picture that Dale showed you, each one of these lines would essentially be 3 of those largest lines coming down to serve this area. And so this is a great initiative that ERCOT has gotten across the finish line. I think it's going to be a game changer for the state of Texas and ERCOT and the Valley, and I hope to see it coming sooner rather than later. So Dale, if y'all are pushing that through RPT, we'd be a sponge supporter. And so how does Sugarland work with these customers? And it's a little bit different than AEP because we are transmission only. And so we cannot serve the last mile. We cannot serve the last customer. So if you're putting in a big box store out here, you're not going to be working with a Sugarland. You are going to be working with Dale and his team at AEP or one of the other co-ops in the region. If you want to work with Sugarland, we're going to be working and focusing on the larger load. So we can only start interacting with the load if it's 25 megawatts or above, and they want transmission level service. And so they have to build their own substation. They have to do the transformation themselves. Then we can work with that customer. But we also have to still bring in AEP for the last mile because we have to do the metering. And that's where Dale said, sometimes it's more advantageous for, to use a neighboring utility's infrastructure and then put in the metering for AEP to serve that customer. And that's the plan that we're working forward with. And that's the idea that ERCOT has put out there for these large loads. And so if you're a large load that wants to connect, we can help you do that. If you have a generation project that wants to connect, Sugarland can help you do that. Otherwise, you're going to be working with Dell a lot. And then that's all the slides I have. Definitely open it for questions. And just the kind of these photos right here was when Sugarland was stringing up their second circuit on that very first project I mentioned with the second circuit from San Antonio all the way down to the port. Sugarland did that hot to still provide service for the rest of the system. But to do that, we had to use helicopters to string the wire. So if you were out and about and saw helicopters flying around transmission towers with wires connected to it, it was actually the helicopters pulling the wires from the trucks themselves. And so that's my last slide. Rick, you have a question?
Just to clarify, they may not understand. Some may not be that we were not, the electrical line we're still out.
Yes.
No.
So these were 345 kV lines. There was 345,000 volts of power on that line at that time. So safety first, like Dell said, we want to do things safely. The safest way to do it would be to de-energize the line while we are actually on it. But that's the construction of adding a second circuit onto an existing line is a multi-month project. And so the outage would have been extensive. It would have had impacts to pricing of power down in the valley. It would have impacts to reliability, resiliency. So knowing that it did have significant impacts to take those lines out for an extended period of time to add the second circuit onto that, we chose to do it hot. And so the line was energized while we're pulling it. So the helicopter pilot is very skilled, and if he makes a mistake, it could end catastrophically for everybody out there. And fortunately, we did not have that happen. Yes, Dale.
Brad, you mentioned the 765 like you did, and I know that con developers, they always very significant thing of how can we get involved and make sure that thing happens in the valley. And it's really not a legislative issue. It's a PUC and ERCOT decision, but those people tend to respond to their legislators. So if you have opportunity to talk to your legislators in the valley, tell what's going on, and the ways that you're experiencing from the projects you're seeing, and encourage what got the Beaver City can moving forward to make sure that we get that 765 down here.
Yeah, absolutely. Even though the legislature is about to wrap up and they're not touching 765, they do have touch points back. They have strong touch points back to commission. And so even if next year you go talk to them, those words will get back to the commission, and the commission has a heavy hand on ERCOT on what ERCOT does from a study perspective. And so as Del mentioned, that's probably the best way for end users to impact this process and speed it up, is to reach out to your representatives, your senators, and say, hey, we saw a lunch and learn where 765 was coming to the Valley, and we want that sooner rather than later. That would be the best way for end users to impact this process. Absolutely. Yes, Rick?
Speaking of the 765, how much will it go on existing infrastructure? Or are they talking about new infrastructure to have all that? Well, they think out of bank.
Yeah, so
what kind of time frame is they push and the 765 goes through? How much time would?
Yeah, so the time frame to build 765 versus 345 is very similar. They come out of the same plants, that a 345 breaker would come out. It's 765. The only difference is it's larger. So it's a larger looking piece of equipment, but it's very similar in nature. A lot of the touch points are going to be existing stations because we have built very strong points along the system. Good example is Lawn Hill. Lawn Hill is a very strong point south of Corpus area. And putting a 765 station there where power can go on and off the grid and move long distances without using the 345 would greatly benefit that region. And so, most of these points are strong new points. There will be a few that will be, ideal from an ERCOT perspective of, hey, we'd like a 765 station here to bring power or to or away from. And those you can see there's some new stations identified, but the majority of them are going to be on existing infrastructure. And so it just would be an expansion. So if you look down here, Kingfisher is this new station that Sharyland, we haven't even started building yet. That's going to be coming this year. That's going to be in San Benito. ERCOT's targeting that as a potential drop-off point for the Valley. And just because, Kingfisher is 50 miles away from McAllen doesn't mean that McAllen's not going to benefit from that, because once you are able to unload and offload the 345 system and have the 765 move and transmit power more efficiently across the state, it will relieve the underlying 138 and 345 system so that McAllen will, if Dale tells you, hey, I got no capacity on my 345 in McAllen, once this happens, then you're, lo and behold, you have 1,000 megawatts show up day one that it's energized, and that's because the 765 is taking all that capacity and putting on the higher transmission lines.
I have questions, but I'm aware that they will ask. Anybody else have any questions? The ports, utilities.
Yes, right.
765 schematic here.
How many do we need?
Yes.
I thought I had that on board, but okay, yeah, I do. So we're building. So the entire plan that ERCOT's laid out is 20 new stations
For the Rio Grande Valley.
Oh, for the Rio Grande Valley, we have 3 stations: Lawn Hill, the Laredo, and then Kingfisher, which is like San Benito or south of Harlingen. Those are going to be the 3 that'll serve the Valley region. And so those stations are 3 out of the 20. But overall, we're doing 20 new stations on the ERCOT grid and about 4,000, almost 5,000 miles of 765 line. And so that's a significant infrastructure build. And so just for cost comparison, each station will be $50 to $100 million of capital improvement. And then each mile of line is about a $5 million worth of 765 line. So you can do the math yourself and realize this is a $30 to $40 billion plan that ERCOT is proposing for the state of Texas, and the Valley is included in part of that. And so it'll be a great benefit to the Valley.
When would it be ready?
So we're looking at the 2030 to 2040 timeframe. So the Permian lines that Dell is building right now, those are going to be energized late 2020s or early 2030s. And then as these new projects get approved, then it takes about 6 to 7 years for it to go from ERCOT saying we need it and the PUC approving it to the actual energization of the lines themselves. And so knowing that, 2040, so 2020, 2033 to now are the times that these lines are going to get approval from ERCOT. And so once that occurs, then you're looking at a 6 to 7 year time frame to build out.
And then Trace, we talked a lot about new transmission. They seem very important, but there were never folks. We still have to have more generation. I mean, we could build all the wires and want. If there's not generation there, it's not going to matter. And one of the nice things, I'm not the expert, I'm just repeating all I've heard about the 765, because again, we have a larger voltage, you have less iron lost, more efficient transit and traction. So it's less important that your generation is it makes the system more generation agnostic.
Yeah.
So we can have more generation in West Texas being jumping it out because it can be run easier with less losses. So that's just another benefit from the sun too.
But yeah, generation. I mean, if we're I mean, some of the. I mean, we have a peak of 90,000 megawatts right now, and ERCOT's estimates are over 100,000 more megawatts in the next 5 to 10 years. And a lot of that is due to the economic development and growth and data centers that are coming to the ERCOT region. But we still need the generation, as Dale mentioned, to power it, because if we don't grow our generation fleet, we cannot grow our large load fleet because you don't have the power to serve it. And as Dale mentioned, we generate the power immediately when it's needed. And so if we don't have it when it's needed, it's not there.